So here we are at the last part of our Bible study for July, looking at the 10 plagues in the middle of this study in Exodus. This is looking at chapters 12 and 13, the 10th and final plague, which results in the Passover of the Lord passing over the houses of the Israelites, and so giving them that distinction and that freedom which he has explained is going to be their redemption. 12:2, though, there's a lot of sort of lead up to this. Remember, throughout this part of the narrative, we're always reporting what God has said, and then Moses and Aaron and the people go and do it. And there's a lot that God has to say, because he's pointing out that this is such a significant and foundational moment for the people of Israel. It's even going to be a new system of marking time. Remember, we said there are ways that we do that in our faith. That's not based on the months of the year in the same way that the Jewish faith is, and yet the Jewish people are told that they will have this month as the beginning of months. We're going to measure time in months now and have particular festivals on days of the month. Many of those festivals do come over into Christian practice as they are baptized and accepted. So Pentecost, which we've just celebrated, was a Jewish festival, Sukkot, and becomes a Christian one, the gift of the Holy Spirit. So this is all still in reported speech. This is all still God talking to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, which they then repeat to the people and carry out according to God's command. And what is this? This significant foundational moment, 12:11, this is the Passover of the Lord. It's not symbolizing or representing the Passover of God. This is the Passover of God. So notice that means God is present in this particular situation for the Israelites, and the Passover is his way of making them distinct, of giving them their freedom, and therefore of realizing their redemption from the things that have enslaved them, in this case the Pharaoh of Egypt. So again, I can see parallels here in the language which we use to talk about the Passover in Christian terms, when Jesus says, "This is my body." And what is this? It is the act of participating in the Passover in its origin. It's the act of God passing over. It's the act of crucifixion and resurrection. But it is also the act of remembering it. Remember, this is God telling Moses and Aaron how they are going to remember the Passover later on as well. So this is both that origin moment and the things that we do to remember and make it present for us, and that's Eucharistic theology too. This is the body of Christ, both that moment of crucifixion and resurrection, and when we share it in communion. And so too, the Passover is a communal act of sharing in a meal, realizing that distinction, redemption for them. They will eat together. That will be their way of signifying their relationship with one another, but to do so in a way that reminds them that they are on the move. This is empowering. They have things to do which will make this Passover happen. This is empowering the men, women, children and animals of Israel to have a part in their own story. It's not then until we get to 12:21 that Moses repeats what he's heard back to the people, and here we get what Moses says, which is slightly different to what God says. So in terms of empowering the people in doing what he says, it's not a word for word transferal. Moses does fulfill the Lord's command, but in his own way, using his own words, telling the elders of Israel what to do. We've got the hyssop introduced because that's not an important detail for God. It's hyssop is often symbolic, and Jesus asks for a drink and is given it on hyssop later on. But perhaps it's just because hyssop is what they have lying to hand, and Moses is giving practical instructions. So there's a difference between what God says and what Moses says, but Moses tells the people what to do. Why? So that by the time we get to 12:29 and the 10th plague is enacted, Pharaoh can tell the people to go and worship. That's 12:31. Worship the Lord as you said. So remember, that's all that the people have been asking to do, is to worship God. They want to travel 3 days into the wilderness, worship God, and at the outset the idea was to come back again. That's not how it ends up. They realise that they must leave Egypt forever, or for the time being, into the wilderness. But remember that worship is the object of the Exodus. The freedom which the Israelites are fighting and longing and working so hard for is so that they can worship. Now, there are many ways in which we worship, including looking after the animals, including consecrating our time, including keeping festivals, including giving praise, thanksgiving, and seeking reconciliation from God. So it's not as easy as just to say, well, we need to worship as the object of our faith. But that is what it is. And that is what the Israelites are seeking through the Exodus. Freedom means that we are able to worship, because worship is done freely by definition. That's what is revealed to us through this story of the Exodus. And Pharaoh adds, perhaps slightly cheekily, bring a blessing on me too. You think perhaps Pharaoh has realised what this is all about then. Again, that blessing must be freely given. A blessing speak well of someone is a free gift that we give. That's why blessings in the church cannot be bought. You might give an offering, but you don't pay for a blessing. It's a free gift and a recognition, therefore, of power. Pharaoh is recognising Moses and Aaron and the Israelites' ability to choose to give that blessing, and therefore recognising the power of God. A formational and foundational moment for Pharaoh, although he still hardens his heart once they've gone. And so the Passover takes place, and the Israelites do just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron, 12:50, and that very day, again the idea of a day being an important marker, moment in time, the Lord brought the Israelites out of the land of Egypt, company by company. So again, we don't actually get the Passover described. We get an affirmation that Moses and Aaron and God did what they said they would do. So the plague has happened. At midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, and Pharaoh tells them to go and they leave the land of Egypt. Chapter 13 then continues this theme. Moses becomes the sign to remember what has happened, because it is his words and his instructions which they have followed. And Moses gives other ways in which they shall remember that, particularly the festivals that they keep, and it may be that they have that they actually wear some of the teachings of God on their foreheads. This is 13:9, and it became quite common in Jewish practice to have a little scroll with a reminder of the Passover on it, which they would wear at festival times on their forehead. So various moments in which the people are reminded what has happened. That reminder, that sign, is a means of their participation in that original act of liberation and redemption, which was the Passover. And again, we talk about that reminder and sign being our participation in the redemption of God through our Eucharistic practices. 13:11, then the Lord, when he brings the people into Canaan, then he will consecrate the firstborn. So there's an element of promise here as well. We looked at that earlier on, that actually the promise was that God would bring Moses to Horeb, and that is where they can worship. But there's an expectation then that will continue, and actually they won't go back to Egypt from Horeb. They will carry on into Canaan, and here we get that hint of that promise now, that God will bring them into the land of the Canaanites. There will be a fulfillment of that promise. So God has killed the firstborn of the Egyptians back in Egypt. He will consecrate the firstborn of the Israelites when they get to Canaan, but in between there is a long journey of understanding, of discernment, of discovery in between. Remember, Moses is actually rejecting that fulfillment already. We know that Moses won't make it to Canaan. Well, Moses has adopted Aaron as his elder brother, as we said, so he is no longer the firstborn, and he will no longer be consecrated to God. Moses knows that as a leader, part of his actions will be giving up his power, not unnecessarily, not out of weakness, but out of justice, and out of a recognition of that his part will be played out in the wilderness and not in Canaan itself. That consecration, that setting apart, that is what redemption is. That is that need, therefore, to buy us back. So God has sort of set up the terms for redemption. Redemption literally means buyback. God has set up the terms for redemption himself, and will fulfill them in Canaan. He sets up the promise and delivers upon it. And that is the story of the Exodus. Finally, in chapter 13, God leads the people through the wilderness with this pillar of cloud and fire to protect them from the front and the back, and Moses takes with them the bones of Joseph, reminding them of that continuity of history, that actually Joseph's story was important, and it was foundational to the people of Egypt, to their economy, to their ways of organising themselves, and yet it was part of Israel's story, and Moses is taking that with them. Moses is almost redeeming Joseph from Egypt as well, and it's a continuity of history for the Israelite people, so that they can remember not just the Passover, but that their history stretches back into the distant past, just as it will stretch forward into the distant future too. Take some time to read those couple of chapters, maybe a couple of times, because actually what it says about redemption and what it sets up in terms of God setting up the terms for redemption and fulfilling it is exactly, to my mind and to many Christians' minds, why we need Jesus. Because in the end, the only one to be able to redeem us from our sin is Jesus. God can only give God's self back to fulfill the promise of redemption that he has set up. And we begin to see that here about what redemption actually means. That's a word that we use a lot, but don't really define, because it's a difficult one to define. We've seen in this book of Exodus that what redemption means setting apart, means consecrating, means making distinct, but doing so at a price. And who is going to pay that price but Jesus Christ himself? I hope that's helped to understand some of where a lot of our Christian teaching comes from, but also how important this story is for the book of Exodus and for the Jewish people in and of itself. Read it a couple of times, go through it, join it up to what we've said last month about the opening chapters of Exodus, and then next month we will look at what happens to Moses and the Israelites once they arrive in the wilderness. And we know that we've not quite seen the back of Pharaoh yet. They will yet need to cross the Red Sea. But the Passover has happened. That was that moment at midnight when God struck the firstborn of Egypt and allowed the Israelites to live. But they will pass through the Red Sea, and we'll see what happens to them in the wilderness. Thank you for looking at Exodus with me, and I hope this has been a good opportunity to study a much longer passage for a longer period of time. So we're spending at least 3 months with Exodus, and we'll see where it goes from there. So thank you for being with me, and God bless.